Hi, I'm Allie Jackson Jolly with Forbes. We're here with Nikki Bethel, who is the president and CEO of Emma Bowen Foundation. Emma Bowen, of course, is the foundation that is laser focused on diversifying the media industry, something that's very near and dear to my heart. So let's just jump in. Um, so something that has been on my mind a lot in the last couple of weeks is media trust, which, as you know, has been on the decline for a while, but it's been a rough couple of weeks, starting with end of February, the Harris poll, along with the Knight Foundation, released some study around trust. And it said that only 50% of readers believe that journalists aren't trying to misinform, misguide, and persuade. And then that with a 1-2 punch with Elon Musk, of course, re-upping his feud with the media, saying that journalists in mainstream media are racist toward white people and people from the AAPI community. So I was thinking about your mission to recruit top talent, and what you're seeing and how is this making it harder for you to go to colleges and say, hey, jump in, come be a journalist? Are you noticing any difference?
No, if anything, it's inspired and motivated another generation of journalists to come and to speak their truth and to be thoughtful about the way they deliver what's going on in communities, in particular of color. So I'm actually finding that we don't have to convince them. But I also think for communities of color, what you just highlighted as part of the catalyst for some of the distrust has been historically happening in communities of color for decades. So I wish I could say that maybe we're having a moment now, but the truth is we've struggled for generations with trusting what we're told. And I don't think the latest administration prior to Joe Biden helped that. If anything, we came up with language like, false facts, fake truths. The language that we started to share with each other in the last 4 to 5 years has been damaging. But I think it's inspired a generation of young people of color to want to be journalists so that they can right-size the ship, so that we can go back to feeling like, is that accurate? Is that rooted in fact? Or is that just what you're thinking and feeling in the moment, which we know can be a fleeting fancy? So I actually think we've got some folks who are on the right side of this narrative and who see this as an opportunity, not necessarily a problem, but an opportunity to get in the gap and tell truthful stories and to start from the bottom. There's something about early in one's career, before you are jaded, before the world gets a handle on you in ways that the glass could be half empty. And I think there are truth tellers in the community who are itching to get out in front, both in front of the camera and behind the camera, to ensure that there is a level of storytelling that actually makes sense because it's rooted in facts. So I think people see this as an opportunity to get engaged and involved in ways that maybe they wouldn't have been as inspired, but they're seeing where they can move the needle. And I think we have enough good folks in the industry that have come through the foundation, that are now on the other side, that are doing really well, and they're honoring their legacy, Emma's legacy, their legacy. And I think our people see it as a thumbprint. This is a reflection of not just me, but the community that I come from. And I think we take that very seriously.
Yeah. Well, so would you address, Mr. Musk talking about, his view that media is not necessarily objective, right? And then there's this underlying conversation that I have with a lot of young journalists when I go and talk to student journalists about the difference between journalism and advocacy. So, would you talk a bit about what Mr. Musk is seeing, and also how you think there could be opportunity for the Emma Bowen fellows that are coming through you?
What I love about what we do at the foundation is we've got 2,000 plus alums who have gone through this rites of passage, this experience of multi-year summers and engaging with us even throughout the school year, such that there's a community where they're encouraging, the older generations are encouraging the newer generation, as it were. And ironically, I think we always have to come at things from we've been resilient for a reason, people of color, whether it's in the United States or across internationally. We've had no choice but to grin, stay in it, wrestle it down by way of the distrust, the untruths, as it were. We don't really have the choice to not engage or to opt out, because opting out means more of the same is going to happen by way of who's telling the story. So I think there's a distinction to be made between advocacy and the things that you lobby for, but you also have to be able to tell the basic truth in any situation, any narrative. And I think our folks are committed to wanting to tell the truth. And then I think it's okay to add a layer of, here's my perspective about that truth. But we should be leading with facts first. So I think for the generations of Emmas who have come through, it's a challenge being in a newsroom. It's a challenge needing to figure out your sources and where is the information coming from. But I think we challenge each other in this business around, why are you here? What's your why? And I think when people get very clear about their why, it helps the work. It's not that it's easy. And I think there are too few of us who are willing to have what I'll call the distinction between, here's the issue and am I advocating for or against said issue? But you have to deliver the facts first. So I think the training that comes with having multiple summers, the ear hustling that goes on in newsrooms, it's incredibly important to help shape the narrative, but then you actually have to have a point of view. And as long as we're separating the emotion, the advocacy portion of this conversation with leading with facts first, I think it's safe. And I also think we owe it to each other. Sometimes we're not willing to be or have the dissenting point of view in the room because it's not encouraged. I think you have to have push-pull. So while we're dealing with facts and we're dealing in truth, there needs to be a moment where we're not all going to agree. We're not a monolithic community. We don't always see things the same. That has to be okay for healthy push-pull dynamic. But to go back to Musk, and I think people have a platform and need to be responsible in how they leverage their platform. I don't know that he sees himself as a mentor or an advocate, whether it be for whites or for people of color, human beings. I think sometimes we get too caught up and we go down the rabbit hole on the voice or the bobblehead, as it were. But if we could appreciate privilege and we can appreciate that he has a platform that I'm not sure he's always using responsibly, people have to have a sense of, does this make sense? Have I done my due diligence? Do I really know for sure what exactly is happening? Because we get too caught up with telling a narrative that makes us feel comfortable. And I would like to think that our Emmas have been trained to find their comfort in being uncomfortable, not just because they're often the only one in the room, whether that's the only woman, the only person of color, but you have to learn to navigate spaces that traditionally haven't been held for us. They've not necessarily created a comfortable environment, but that doesn't mean that we don't venture into those spaces. So I think we're training our Emmas to be fearless, to be smart, to do their homework, and to be thoughtful about where does advocacy net out in their experience. I think the experience of going through the journey is what gives them the wherewithal. It's what holds them true to a higher standard, not necessarily because the people before them were modeling for them what it looks like. So I think there's an ethical component to this that if you are willing to take the time to unpack, you'll net out in a better place, both psychologically, but also socially. And I do think too often we're not able to walk into a room, not have a perspective, at least one that we're willing to back up. And so it can be challenging and uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean we don't do it.
Yeah, okay. So I know I don't have enough time now because there were so many things that you just said that I wanted to ding on, but I'm gonna try and squeeze in as many as the good points as I can. You brought up mentorship, and of course that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you here. To come and talk with our newsroom, which is also trying to embody newsroom change, make sure that we are able to create a newsroom that looks more like America. And I think that, for me personally, a big piece of that, as I've been here for the last couple of years, is around creating a culture of mentorship, right? And so it's something that Emma Bowen has done for years. I wanted to ask you, though, one of the things that comes up, and I think they're good questions, but it's around the idea that mentorship now isn't only about training, it's also about creating access to the decision makers, right? So white men are very lucky. We know statistically, this is not just something I'm saying, based on, accepted studies, have more natural, organic opportunities to interact with decision makers, which directly impacts their advancement. So when I think about mentorship for our newsroom, I'm thinking about not only having somebody who can train and be a shoulder, but also create direct access. But here's where it gets tricky, and this is where I want to get your input. Because of that, was also a study that makes me feel so uncomfortable to talk about, but I'm a journalist, so I will. It talks about the premiumness of the white male mentor. So that is to say that when I'm taking my early career journalists and matching them up, on one hand, I am thinking, who gets them closest to the decision makers? But on the flip side, am I reinforcing structural racism by saying that they're going to have to chat? So tell me, what do you say to this? How do we handle this?
I actually don't think it's a matter of either or. I think it's both. I think it's and I think that young people of color need both the white men that created the game, that have done well. There's the idea of privilege, which comes with they can just walk into spaces and feel like they belong. They're not waiting for someone to give them permission, whether it be permission to enter or permission to speak. And I think for so long, we do the opposite. We put our head down, we do good work, and we just hope someone will see us and promote us and take us with them. I have been a fan. When I write my book, I have a chapter, FWGs. So I don't know if I'm reinforcing this either, my favorite white guys, because I was clear young in my career that women of color have leaned in heavily with me. So that's half of it. But I also needed that white male mentor or sponsor. Mentor is we already have a relationship. You know me, you know my desires, you know my wishes, and you want to help me achieve them all. Sponsorship means that you have access to rooms and people and places that I don't, and that I might never if not for you carrying my name with you. So to your point, until we demystify how this happened years and years and centuries ago, why it is this way, it is what it is. So then how do we get in quickly? Because we don't have a whole lot of time to rise through the ranks and to do so effectively, which means lifting as you climb. But you have to know the game. You have to have the tools to win at the game. Oftentimes that comes from having a white male mentor and or sponsor or advocate so that they can actually tell you, don't do that. And here's why you don't want to do that. Those conversations happen organically. And it typically is because someone sees you. The magnifying glass is out in ways you don't even know, that someone's watching your every move. They're studying you and they're deciding, do you have the potential? Do you have what it takes to get to the top? Because it's one thing to get in the room. It's another to stay in the room. It's the relationships, the trust is what keeps us in the room. And oftentimes it means having to operate from a place of being vulnerable. And we've not all been taught how to be vulnerable. It goes back to you get in the room, you do good work, you put your head down, someone will see you. No, if we want to stack the deck in our favor, we have to be vulnerable. We have to be willing to trust, which means we have to put ourselves out there. So I'd like to think that that narrative will shift, because the more white men that pull men of color, women of color with them, you're diversifying rooms that would not have previously been diverse. Now, the onus is on us to keep that door open and to bring in the next generation and the next generation, so that everyone starts to buy into the lifting as we climb. So I think I think you need both. I've benefited from both. I need to be able to talk to someone who looks like me, who can understand that my challenges are going to be very different than that of white women, but that's not to discount their ability to teach me or to help me get over hurdles. And so I have found in my career that I've benefited from all of the above, but I also know that I put myself out there so that I could be molded, so that I could be the sponge soaking it up. And I try to tell this next generation to be thoughtful about, there's who you think sees you, and then there's who sees you. And you have to be intentional on both sides. Mentors, sponsors, advocates, folks like us who are already in the room, we do have to be mindful of who else is sitting to the right and to the left of me. And if there's not enough of us, how do we leverage those relationships that, if we didn't take the time to push-pull, if we didn't take the time to show up worthy, and not because someone else told us that we were worthy, but because we know we're worthy, so that when we get into the room, we know and have all the skills to stay in the room. So I absolutely think I've benefited from both. I think about my colleagues who are doing well for themselves, who've moved up the ranks. It's because they opened themselves up to be the recipient of different advisors, regardless as to the shape or to the color or to the gender, for that matter. I think more is more. You want to walk into a room and have people want to lean in. That's what we're teaching our fellows. That's what our alums know. And our alums are the gifts that keep on giving. When they can tell their story in an authentic way, in a textured way, I think it does a version of surprise and delights the next generation. But you have to first see your face in high places to know that it's possible. If you don't, it's not that you can't, but you may not have the blueprint in front of you to help you navigate. And Lord knows we have enough to navigate. And then on top of that, I'm suggesting that you find your comfort in being uncomfortable. It's a lot of work to be done, but it's worth it. It's worth it. But I think the first question is, do you want it? And are you willing to go through what it's going to take to get there? And I'm learning more and more every day that what got me here is not what's going to get me there by way of my next step, which means I'm going to have to talk to people who are in spaces and places that even I'm not in, even at this level of my career. So as long as you're open to the learning and you're open to who's leaning in and leaving their thumbprint on you, I think the more open you are to the universe sending you what you need, but you have to first know what it is. And in some cases, you may not, which means you need to ask more questions than you may actually have answers, and that you want your well to be deep and full with a little bit of everything, because people have a lot to teach. I think sometimes we go about things in a vacuum and we're not always open to hearing constructive feedback. Doesn't mean we have to agree with it, but we need to show up as being open to it. And those are the moving pieces: emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, effective communication, how to receive feedback that you may not like or agree with. There's a gracious way to do it all so that you stay in the game and that the people around you know you're invested. But we have to teach them what that looks like in order for them to get there. I don't think we'll get there by osmosis.
Yeah. So I know that we're almost out of time, but you and I have had this conversation before, I think, which is that the one thing that we have in common is that we're change makers, right? We're looking to really change the system, and we believe we can. And I think that to be a change maker, you have to be a little bit optimistic, because you have to believe, this is my view, you have to believe that it's possible. So I was hoping that you would leave us with a bit of optimism. What do you think, over the last couple of years with the heightened emphasis on newsroom change? What's the thing that keeps you optimistic, or you think that we should all cheer about?
Oh, I like that question. And yes, we've touched on this in prior conversations. We really are a resilient people. We didn't get here by falling out and having a temper tantrum and yelling that the world is not fair and it's not good and there's no space for us. The truth is, we still have to forge ahead. We still have to create the energy that's not in the room. We often have to be that energy. So the glass is half full is an understatement. We didn't get here as a people by feeling like the sky is falling and woe is me. And, while I would like to have a temper tantrum sometimes and fall out, the truth is we've learned to be graceful even in the face of adversity. So if we didn't have truth tellers, if we didn't have folks who see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, especially coming out of these last 3 years of 2 pandemics, racism and COVID, and the aftermath, the domino effect of what we all felt, whether you're mainstream or of color, these last 3 years were a real aha, in some cases, moment, right? And so I don't know that we would be here. I don't think that the good fight would be fought. I don't think that we would be standing on the shoulders of an Emma or any of the other community leaders who know exactly that it takes a toll on the body physically and mentally. But that's why we're having this conversation. That's why mentors are key. That's why you need advocates, because we're not doing this work alone. No one should go about this work, whether it's specifically with a title of DEI or it's a part of your portfolio of offerings because it's just what we do, which is what we do. I don't think we have the luxury of tapping out. There's no such thing as tapping out. So we stay in it, and we have to have circles that allow us to be honest about what we're experiencing, the frustration, mental health and wellness. How are we checking in with each other? Because the road is not easy. It will be fraught with all sorts of challenges that sometimes we'll be prepared to manage, and other times you're going to have to call the village for reinforcements. But if we're all doing a woe is me dance and what are we going to do? It's a little disrespectful to those that have already been in the fight. If we think about civil rights, I mean, this conversation has been had so many different ways that the fact that it's 2023 and we're still talking about diversifying newsrooms and being thoughtful about what does it take not just to hire, but to retain employees and to have them feel like they belong. What a novel idea, right? It's not rocket science, right? People have to move past their distrust and unpack where it came from, because we weren't born like this. We learn these behaviors as we get older and mature. So if we're okay with debunking some of the myths, if we're okay educating and explaining along the way, which I get the fatigue of being a person of color, one of the only in rooms of mainstream, it's tiring. And you get tired of explaining. But the truth is, I feel like I owe it to these little brown and black faces that look like me. I feel like those who went ahead of me, I owe it to them. I owe it to this next generation to be honest about the frustrations, to talk about the fatigue, but to not give up. I don't think we're allowed to give up. So we keep with the positive. I'm a spiritual person. I'm not going to quote chapter and verse from the Bible. I could, but I don't. I think that there has to be a higher power, a higher vibration operating for us all at different levels. Everybody can't be on 10. You need climbers and you need campers. The campers are the folks making it happen. The climbers are the visionary, the change agents. But then we need folks who are going to take our ideas and do something with them. So then how do you keep the middle strong, right? Because it's the middle that I worry about. The folks at the extremes are always going to do what is required to be at the extreme ends of disruptors, visionaries. You need both. The folks in the middle, how are we taking care of the folks in the middle? And so I would say they would need to see faces like ours, smiling, speaking our truth, walking into who we really are, and that there's a space for us. I earned it. I know you earned it. So we didn't get here without having scrapes and bruises along the way, but we're still here. And I think being able to tell a very honest story about our journey and the fact that it's not all roses and sunshine and butterflies, we have to create space for us to be honest about some of the challenges and how do we work through those challenges so that this next generation who unfortunately lived behind a screen for a few too many years, it's already the digital generation, so they're comfortable with technology. But we also have to ramp them up to do the socializing and the networking and the office politics, as it were. They have to be taught that too. And some of that needs to happen in person, which we've been challenged by for the last few years of everybody, for the most part, being remote. So it just means rolling up your sleeves and doing a little more.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. I could do this for hours, but we'll do it again. Thank you.